Just a few words to open up. Really an honor to be called last minute for this. It's really a pleasure to speak with all of you. I first learned about CCL actually around the time that I was teaching at Monash, the class that James was in last year, and I've been reading about it ever since, and was really excited when I found out that James had joined, and other Monash students have since joined. I think you guys do phenomenal work. I'm gonna present today kind of the thesis of my book and the research from my book. It's a presentation that was, it's quite similar to the one that was presented in May to the Victoria group. I'm going to cover a lot of ground, and please let me know if you have any questions. Please do be in touch after the presentation also. I'm glad to take any emails or questions that you might have. I also want to just quick shout out to some friends that joined. We've got Claire Witten in Perth, who's actually a CCL member. Really glad to have you here, Claire. Claire Carmody in Melbourne, really nice to have you with us. And also Will Dable, thank you very much for joining last minute as well. I think we might also have Jimmy, one of my students from this year at Monash on the line. If you're here, nice to have you. So with this, the title of my presentation is, we already have a carbon price, -5 trillion USD per year, demand change now at COP26. So I spoke with Rod this morning about like the goals of this presentation and the discussion today. He wanted to just emphasize that COP26 is happening later this month, early next month. And now's a great time to get everybody on board to call up our MPs, organize together, and get them to set strong and immediate targets at the upcoming COP26. I know that the targets are not very ambitious that most people are looking at. Net zero by 2050. Really, it seems like we need zero immediately. But we'll take what we can get and then ask for more. Seems to be like the pragmatic strategy of the day. So my book, you can sign up for the mailing list at deviousframes.com if you're interested. So the carbon price that we already have right now on Earth, -5 trillion dollars, according to the IMF. We are subsidizing the cost of fossil fuels through our taxes in almost every country on Earth. China is the largest, of course, $1.4 trillion a year spent subsidizing mainly coal. So we are paying for global warming. To say that we're not, that we need more money to stop global warming, we need more carbon, or what do you call it, climate budget, it's a little bit of a farce. We need to stop paying for it to begin with. Every country on Earth is paying, or might be a little bit of a hyperbole, but almost every country on Earth is paying more to cause global warming than they are to stop it. So we already have a carbon price. So I'm going to present why no one knows that, we don't talk about that, and why we're not acting on that by presenting 9 what I call devious frames in my book. These 9 devious frames are ways that industry dilutes political will for organized citizen action. You guys know very well in CCL what political will is, but I think the important thing that I want to emphasize is that political will is zero sum. A little more attention for something else means a little less attention for what you want. To really have political will for something, you need to focus on asking for that. So the more we believe in these devious frames that I'm presenting, the less we support regulatory change. And significant studies have supported that. I can send you more if you'd like. I'll be presenting some today. So here's some good examples of really narrow margins. I like to emphasize that in terms of political will, you usually don't need that much more. And even a little bit less can be catastrophic. In June of this year, Switzerland was doing a referendum for whether or not they wanted to pass the Paris Climate Agreement or not. It lost by 1.6%. 1.6%. So we really don't need a ton of political will. Yeah, if we're distracted just a little bit, or if citizens can advocate just sufficiently, we can push the needle where we need it to be. So the first devious frame of these devious frames I'm going to be presenting is denialism. I'm not really going to talk about this. We've got more ground to cover. You all know what denialism, climate denialism is. Post-denialism is quite fun. Here's a book on the left. It's a great PR book. If you're interested in reading more about PR, Toxic Sludge is good for you. Fascinating. While the authors were writing this book, they didn't know anything about toxic sludge. They just used this term or title because it was funny. The toxic sludge lobby called them and actually said, you know, we don't really like being called toxic sludge anymore. We're biosolids, and we think we can really do a lot for you. It's a perfect example of post-denialism. But here on the right, you have an actual book that was done by a guy funded by the fossil fuel industry. Need to close something. The Many Benefits of Atmospheric CO2 Enrichment is the title. I mean, that's a great way to call it in global warming, atmospheric CO2 enrichment. The subtitle is How Humanity and the Rest of the Biosphere Will Prosper from This Amazing Trace Gas that so many have wonderfully characterized as a dangerous air pollutant. So you can see the fossil fuel industry has no scruples. They'll do anything. Okay, normalization. This frame is really intense. In the case of global warming was normalized by fossil fuel funded PR in the mid 1990s to be called climate change. And there's a well-documented paper trail of this happening. You can see this is a clip from a leaked memo that was sent to the White House of the United States. And this term, Yale has researched the effects of calling it climate change and not calling it global warming. And this term has been found to significantly reduce citizen likelihood of engaging politically. Climate change is natural, change is normal. By normalizing global warming, we've reduced the likelihood that people will act on it. And that could probably, going back to COP26, the fact that we have a COP26 is a testament to just how far we've normalized global warming and to how much these frames have worked. You know, 26 years, we've had 26 conferences. We've known all along this was happening. Silver boomerangs, a devious frame that is looking at the efficiency for global warming. The reason I call this a silver boomerang, this category of framing in PR as a silver boomerang, is because these frames technically do work, but when human beings use them, it creates a rebound effect, a boomerang effect. So when you make cars more efficient, like you make electric cars, or you make light bulbs more energy efficient, what you have is people use them more, and you get the same amount of emissions. And this has been tested. You've had 2 studies came out just this year. Over a population, we know that we won't see any improvements on reducing greenhouse gases from any technology that increases efficiency of anything. And we've known this since the 1800s. Jevons, Stanley Jevons, the Jevons paradox is named after him. He documented this about in regards to coal factory or coal power plants. The magic frame. This frame refers to anything that's quite fanciful. There's no evidence would ever work. Just a complete con or a scam. Carbon capture storage in this case, well known to not do anything. We recently had a 500 organizations signed a letter, I think, to the United Nations saying, please stop trying to include carbon capture storage in any kind of proposal because it's just nonsense. Treatment frame, in this case, it's climate adaptation. We have good evidence to show the more you focus on climate adaptation, the less political will you have for stopping global warming to begin with. Victim blaming. Victim blaming comes in a lot of forms, but the more you focus on the individual in terms of framing, the less political will you have for regulatory change. And so when you try and educate people on the environment to act as individuals, or you try and educate people, you use carbon labels, all of these things, media campaigns, remember to recycle, all of these things don't work, and they undermine what does. So on the previous slide, you had, You had somebody take this Exxon billboard or Chevron billboard and graffiti it, "I will stop lobbying against climate legislation." Very rightly so. Like carbon footprint, for example, was documented and well known to have been invented by British Petroleum. So even the concept of the carbon footprint is something invented by the fossil fuel industry. It's been very well known. These are a lot of quotes, and I don't have time to go through them all, but the one at the bottom, I think, is the most striking. The more people believe in free will, the less likely they are to support regulatory action, the more they blame the victims. So we'll never win if we victim blame. We can't victim blame, and neither can we victim blame and act as individuals and call for individual action and support regulatory change. We can't do both. It just doesn't work. The more you do individual actions, the less people support policy change, such as the citizen climate dividend, the carbon dividend. The knotted web frame is complexity. So you see here, Chevron is saying addressing climate change risks is in a meaningful way is a complex long-term proposition. We know very well that the more people use complexity, systems, circular economy, all this kind of jargon makes people think things are too vague and confusing to ever act. If you really, I think the structure people that are good-natured are really looking for here, the term they're really looking for here is structure. Structural problems can be addressed. Subsidies are a structural problem. When you say complexity, circular systems, things get quite vague and reduce political support for action. Multifactorial, British Petroleum again invented what's called the all of the above approach, which was then picked up by the Obama administration and then Trump in the United States, and kind of exists everywhere. The idea that we need to try everything at once. The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist says, there's another term for this called silver buckshot. The Bulletin of Atomic Scientists says, silver buckshot is every bit as meaningless as the all of the above energy strategy, but somehow manages to make it sound more effective and less desperate. This framing is quite tough for a lot of people to grasp because it's so pervasive throughout society, but it's really quite harmful. We can't be just doing everything. We can't mix the stuff that we know doesn't work with what does. I gave a lecture the other day, and I had one of my students actually say, "But don't we need a little bit of everything?" And I responded, "Do you like steak with ice cream on it?" And just to underscore, and ketchup, just to underscore the point that you really mixing things together that doesn't necessarily make them good. And it's quite a fallacy to say otherwise. So here we are, just kind of concluding the devious frame segment of my presentation. We can never do both with framing, with really building the critical mass of political will that we need in order to stop global warming. Otherwise, we're going to have COP55. And we don't have time to have COP55. We have to be focusing. That's why we all need to be calling our MPs right now and demanding action, because we need action right now. And for the same reason, we can't do both. We can't be mixing frames. We can't be doing one thing and another. We lose out, we lose focus. So the other thing that corporations do to fight political will for regulatory action, to fight us, is they misframe what is organized citizen advocacy. And they do this in a number of ways, and some of what I'm going to say might shock a number of people here. But before I begin, I just want to touch on what really good organizing looks like. And it's quite CCL. CCL is a wonderful form of an organization. The model is often called the snowflake model of organizing. But what you want to see is small groups such as Citizen Climate Lobby Melbourne, tiered up into Citizen Climate Lobby Victoria, tiered up into Citizen Climate Lobby Australia, tiered up into Citizen Climate Lobby Global. This tiering structure allows for a lot of power for the organization because you're working together in unison. So you can see here on the top is a diagram depicting this kind of model. You know, you have a small group like Citizen Climate Lobby Melbourne, which is in a coalition, which is called Citizen Climate Lobby Victoria, which is an alliance, et cetera, et cetera. You guys get the idea. And together, Citizen Climate Lobby organizes and advocates for really specific, actionable policy change. And then you get a result. On the bottom here, you see failed, unorganized citizen advocacy. Everybody acting as an individual with no real clear goal. So the first way that this happens, that corporations try to frame advocacy and organizing as an atomized thing, as they atomize us, they break us apart into tiny atoms. They say that we need to be just voters and act just as voters, but this is a very naive and simplistic understanding of what democracy is. Yes, we have the right to vote. We also have the right to assembly, to freedom of expression. We have the right to association. We have the right to petition. If all we have is voting, then we're just North Korea or Syria, because they vote every year and it doesn't lead to anything. You have to have external actors such as CCL advocating and sustaining pressure on government for it to change. Just protest, we get atomized to become just protesters, forgetting about what's behind a successful protest. Strong organizations, strong unions, strong movements. Actually, sorry, I have to go back to just voting one more time, really quickly. One thing I like to underscore here with just voting is women got the right to vote without the right to vote. I think that really underscores that voting is not enough. Sorry, so back to just protest. So women, again, for the suffrage movement, they didn't just protest, but they organized. And this idea of just protest really undermines us all. Google, Facebook, and SodaStream that I know of, they give their employees off the day, Labor Day, to go and protest, but they also pay for union busting. So you see, like, Google knows that protesting on its own doesn't do anything, and then, but it does know that union organizing does do something. So they're very happy to encourage protesting. Ethical investing, divestment, boycotting, boycotting. This is called, the theory behind this is capital starvation or capital gorging. But research looking at divestment, at boycotts, impact investment or boycotts shows that none of this stuff affects corporate bottom lines at all. It does very successfully distract from organized advocacy, though, principally because we reframe citizens as consumers, or we reframe them as investors, which is, and we reframe the entire problem as one devoid of democracy. You could ethically invest or boycott or boycott or divest just as easily in a dictatorship as you could as a democracy. This approach allows us to throw all of our tools that are given to us by the wayside. We ignore the fact that we're citizens and we have rights, and instead we just act as consumers or investors. Okay. The other way that we were undermined is by anti-activist legislation. Corporations like charity, not change. So here's an article in the newspaper, the Sydney Morning Herald. I did not dissuade Vladimir Putin from his crackdown, but now Australia is employing the same tactic. These actions taken to take the rights of charity organizations, their right to advocate, away from them is very scary. Jeff, would you mind putting yourself on mute? Thank you. So what you see is there's around the world, there's increasingly a lot of laws, like charity laws, that give tax breaks to citizen organizations as long as they are politically silent. And whether or not technically these organizations are kind of, by some kind of loophole, allowed to advocate, because people are scared, there's what's called a chilling effect. So you still see advocacy less. One Australian journalist says, an environmental group can quietly plant trees, but cannot say, if you want to save the forest, you will need to vote for the forest saving party. Even if the published policy platforms and public statements of various political parties demonstrate this is an objective truth, there are no such restrictions on corporations. There's also a movement right now, an alliance of NGOs or charities in Australia called Hands Off Our Charities Alliance. It looks like the charity laws in Australia are about to get worse. So this alliance looks like they're doing very good work. I took this quote on the bottom from today from their website. Another element is corporations will fund citizen organizations. They fund us so that we're quiet. So over the as global warming has increased over the last years, Sierra Club has taken $25 million from fossil fuel corporations. World Wildlife Fund, you've got a Der Spiegel headline that reads, WWF helps industry more than environment. A Guardian headline reads, WWF International accused of selling its soul to corporations. It's not good. There's no way that funding doesn't influence practice. There's a saying, of course, in Latin, cui bono, but also I like to think of it as, we know that money in politics is problematic, but money in charities is also problematic. There's no way to take money and not be influenced by that money. It's called a conflict of interest for a reason. This is why we call bribery scandals scandals. So the midterm solution for this is, if you can, avoid registering as a charity or any way a status that kind of inhibits freedom, and try to take membership dues and avoid external donations. There's a number of perverse incentives that occur, or problems that occur when you take money from external parties instead of your members. The organization tends to be then incentivized to grow the money, fundraise more, and not take care of its membership base. You also get the incentive to serve the donors over your members. And also you get the incentive that instead of having members having an active say in what happens in the organization, you have instead professional staff dominating decision-making, which is very problematic. Okay, the last thing that happens that corporations do to distract us is they try to distract us away from regulatory change and towards other kinds of targets, and get those other targets to act voluntarily. So the first one is we try and get corporations to act voluntarily. This is sometimes called CSR, corporate social responsibility. There's a guy named Raleigh Williams, and I like how he puts it. He says, corporations are leading on climate change in the same way that dictators are leading on deposing themselves. I think that puts it very well. Corporations are not going to be voluntarily undermining their own bottom lines. It would be illegal for them to do so. They have to take care of their shareholders, and as it should be. CEO blaming. When we CEO blame, we're personifying failure, and we're failing to look at the structural incentives for the ways those CEOs act. Politician blaming, similarly. We blame politicians for their unethical deeds, so-called unethical deeds. And then by doing so, we failed to recognize that we needed to regulate those politicians more to begin with. We need laws that govern political behavior. We need laws that prosecute politicians, that don't give them impunity. But the more we say we need ethical politicians, we forget that politicians are structurally inhibited from acting differently than their donors and their constituents. So usually you start to see politicians acting badly when you have money in politics. And the problem is the money in politics and the incentives that allow for money in politics, not the ethical behavior of those politicians. I mean, we're never going to get anywhere if we're waiting around forever for the perfectly ethical politician. Plutocrat blaming, similarly, we're seeing this more and more. Blaming rich people like Elon Musk or blaming Jeff Bezos. I mean, they themselves build up their cults of personality in order to distract from the subsidies they're getting, the incentives they're getting to behave the way they are. By blaming them, we're distracting ourselves from the meaningful target of regulatory change. Multi-stakeholderism is when, or Frameworks Institute calls this the everybody's responsible, no one's responsible model. It's a strategy of diluting responsibility and similarly distracts us from regulatory change. So we need to focus on regulatory change. I'm going to be concluding shortly, but just to recap, we need to be organizing in groups to fight back. We need to be advocating with a very narrow focus on policy objectives, just as CCL does. And then a reminder, please call your MPs, get together with your colleagues and friends and other CCL members, and get in touch with your government officials and other stakeholders that might be relevant to COP26, and hopefully we can see some change there. So thank you all very much. Please stay in touch. Back to you, James.